Tonight at the museum I'm doing something that I haven't done for quite a long time. I'm giving a lecture. I'm actually giving a lecture on the immigration of Italians coming to America. And I've been very fortunate to have the Lower East Side Preservation Association come in and basically organize this event for us and actually have a full house. So it's a great experience right down here on Mulberry Street. And I hope everybody enjoys it. Good. So good, so quiet. Actually, I usually give the lectures during the day to the students that come in, and I have to be honest with you. You can usually lately hear a pin drop in the room. I'm surprised because I remember teaching in the classroom, and it wasn't always like that. But it's a pleasant surprise. Anyway, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Richard Moses, who has a few words to say to you. So, Richard.
Thanks, Dr. Scelsa. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight to our event, and be ready for my Italian here. Nuova, Vita, Nuova. I get confused with my botched Spanish, so it's a very bad mingling here. Italian-American immigration and culture in New York City's Lower East Side. So I'm with the Lower East Side Preservation Initiative. We're a group of preservationists, architects, community activists who are trying to preserve the historic architecture and culture of New York's historic Lower East Side, which actually starts at around 14th Street and goes all the way down below Chinatown, Broadway, and to the east, basically. And so this has been a very exciting time for us now. We just recently had the East Village Lower East Side Historic District ratified by the New York City Council. This is a district that runs from about 2nd Street up to St. Mark's Place with a spine along 2nd Avenue. So that's a very exciting thing for us. We feel that the Landmarks Commission in the city is finally paying a little bit more attention to the importance of this area historically, both for our city and for our country. So we're very happy about that, and we're also very excited, of course, about tonight's events. So without too much more ado, here's Dr. Scelsa, President and Founder, as you know, of the Italian American Museum. Thank you very much.
Hey everybody, at least half of you in the room, if not more, do. My name is Joseph Scelsa. I am the president and founder of the Italian American Museum here on Mulberry Street, which of course, as you know, has been here now since 2008. I've got to give you a little bit of background in terms of that before I actually start with the lecture. The museum started in 2001 when we were chartered by the University of the State of New York. We were chartered as an educational institution, the first Italian American museum to be chartered in the United States of America. It sounds strange because there have been so many Italians that have immigrated to the United States, over 25 million they tell me, can trace some lineage today of the people living in America to Italy, or what was Italy, or what parts of Italy, even before it was Italy. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but to have the idea, I think what happened was that we came of age. In 1999, I did an exhibition at the New York Historical Society. It was known as the Italians of New York, 5 Centuries of Struggle and Achievement. Anybody in this room see that exhibit? Olivia, yeah?
I took my children to that.
Yeah.
It was a children's section.
It was a one.
My grandmother's wedding dress.
That's right. Yep. So the few of you that were here were actually there and some participated. My grandfather's wine press was in that exhibit, and it was the Italians of New York. That's the poster that's on the subways and buses. And I found out that there was a real opportunity to engage people, to get them involved, and help them to understand more about this experience. And to be honest about it, just like all other professors. You know, you get involved with these types of activities because you have some personal interest. Now, I have a tendency of sharing my personal interest with everybody else, so that's why we ended up having a museum. I mean, my mother's collection that she saved, was the basis, was the beginnings of the museum. I had it, unfortunately, she passed away in 1992, but when she passed away, every little object that she had saved had notes on it, and dates on it, and everything. And, you know, it was just a wonderful for me to have that to remember. And I realized that that was wonderful for me, and that by doing something like this, it would be wonderful for our community. I think it is. And it's not only wonderful for the Italian-American community, it's wonderful for the non-Italian community as well, because they get a chance to learn and to see what this experience was all about, and understand the real Italian experience in America. Understand the real Italian experience in America. Why they came here, which is what we're going to talk about this evening, and what happened to them once they got to the Lower East Side. So, and of course, this was once the largest Little Italy in the United States. The largest. By 1933, East Harlem became larger. But prior to that, this was the largest Italian-American community in the United States. It was huge. It wasn't just one or two blocks like we have today. It used to be 3 blocks a few years ago. I was going to say a few weeks ago. And it's getting smaller every day. It's getting smaller every day. And that's progress, and you can't do much about it. My grandparents, I mean, I have roots here. My grandparents were married in Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. My father was baptized in Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. His baptismal gown is in the fourth showcase, by the way, on the bottom, and their marriage certificate in Italian from Old St. Patrick's is in there as well. So that was in 1908 and 1910. Since after that, they moved out of here as they got more successful, and they moved up to the country, to the Bronx. The Northeast Bronx was like the country. When I grew up there as a kid, I thought I was in the country because there was so much vacant land. And I thought everybody was a farmer because everybody just had these little plots of land, which they couldn't have down here on Mulberry Street. Right? Which is a big reason as to why they went there, because guess what? The people that came here mostly were farmers. You know, they came from the agricultural south of Italy, which again I'm going to be talking about again in a minute. Anyway, so I wanted to give you a little bit about my lineage, my family history. That's a very small amount. I am so much into this, just like you are, that I have now hired a genealogist, and probably sometime in the fall I will give you another lecture on, if anybody's interested besides me, on my family, and from the early parts of the centuries that preceded us. I mean, I've gone back now to 1811, I'm going back further, so we'll see what happened. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about Italy and what was once before it was Italy. Now, what I have up here on the boards for us to see is what Italy looks like today. This is the 20 regions of Italy. And you have, of course, all the way up Trentino up in the north, all the way down to the south, you have Sicily, Sardinia, Calabria. But most of the Italians that came to the United States, and the mass immigration was between 1880 and 1920, came from what they call the Mezzogiorno, which was the southern part of Italy. Everything south of Rome. Lazio is the region where Rome is, and everything south is where they mostly came from. From Abruzzo, a lot of the Abruzzes came after World War II actually, but there were some before. But definitely from Campania, Basilicata, Calabria, and Sicily. Campania is where Naples is. Campania is the region of Naples. And this is an important area because the port of Naples was a major port of debarkation. Well, the two major ports for the Italians leaving at that time were from Campania in Naples, and in Sicily from Palermo, which is right about here. And very often they'd go from Palermo to Naples and then on their way across the Atlantic Ocean. All right. Now, Italy did not look like this prior to 1861, and that's what we're going to just have briefly talk about. Prior to 1861, it looked something like this. This is what the South looked like prior to 1861. You don't see any Calabria and Basilicata and Puglia. No, what you see is the kingdom of the two Sicilies. This was a kingdom. And I like to tell, and when I tell this story, it's not a story, I tell this history. When I tell this history, a lot of times people say, Italy only became a country in 1861? I mean, they don't realize it. It's a very young country as a country. Prior to 1861, you had the Kingdom of Sardinia. You had the Papal States, which was right across the center. The Kingdom of Sardinia was also over here. It had where Sardinia is today. You also had Tuscany, Venezia, which is where Venice is, Parma, Lombardia. These were city-states, but this whole area was one kingdom. And what I like people to realize is, in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, prior to 1822, there were only two classes of people. Prior to 1822, there were the aristocracy, the landowners, and everybody else. And prior to 1882, everybody else was a serf. You know, the difference between a serf and a slave: serf can't leave the land. A slave can be sold from one landowner to another, but a serf cannot be sold from one landowner to another. So you were indentured to the land for life prior to that. So the people that were coming in the latter part of the 19th century, were the grandchildren, children and grandchildren of these serfs. And this was this wasn't just, if I say agricultural, it sounds pastoral. It sounds like it was like this farming community that was, this wonderful area where they had where it's just a pastoral scene with lots of fruit and vegetables. No. It wasn't like that at all. Washington Irving described Sicily as the conditions of the peasants there worse than the conditions for the freed Africans in the south of the United States. I mean, they were living in dirt huts, no windows. The windows were holes in the walls, dirt on the floor. They had, for water, they had to go down to the stream to bring it back up. The bathroom was a hole in the ground behind the house. This was not exactly what I would call, a wonderful condition. But this is what the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies provided. And even after the serfs were emancipated, conditions didn't change. Now they became tenant farmers. And they had no land. So they had to for tenants on the land. Almost everything they produced went back to the overlords. So they didn't eat, even though they produced food, they were starving. There was not enough for them. There was no opportunity, no possibility, no educational system, no roads or transportation. It was pretty terrible. So the first opportunity they got, they left. But in order to unify the country, in the early part of the 19th century, there were some famous people that made that happen. This is Giuseppe Mazzini. He is considered to be the heart or the brain and of the heart of the operation. He started the Italy Society back in the early 1800s, and he championed the cause of a united peninsula to become Italy. He, of course, was the heart, but the Count Camillo Cavour, who was the prime minister of the Piemonte region, was the brains that was able to make that happen. He united the entire North. But it took one other gentleman, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who's wearing his poncho because he was in South America before he went back to Italy, to unite it. He's the George Washington, for those of you who don't know, of Italy. And just like George Washington, he refused to be king. When he turned over the kingdom of the Two Sicilies to Umberto, the king of the Savoy, which now became all of this area up here. He just walked away, and went off into the sunset, so to speak. Now Garibaldi did this in 1860 by taking a ship all the way down to Marsala in Sicily, where he united with the partisans and fought his way across the Straits of Messina and then up near Naples, and where he handed over the kingdom. And in doing this courageous act, he united both the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies with the city-states that now had become part of the kingdom of Sardinia, the whole kingdom of Sardinia, and the whole thing was now united in one country, Italy. Okay, so it's now united, and it looks something like this because these were not broken up into regions at that time. Okay, this is King Umberto, who became the first king of Italy. So it became a constitutional monarchy, but even as the conditions of the peasants did not change in these areas, even though now it was now it was one country. These areas eventually developed into their own regions, and now Italy, of course, has 20 regions. At the same time, a mass means of transportation is developing, and these are the steamships that make it possible for transatlantic travel on a regular basis. And I just found out from some of the research I'm doing that my great-grandfather who came to America, Bartolomeo, went back and forth several times, and that was not unusual. Yet the trip took anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks, one way, to cross the Atlantic Ocean at that time. And they would go in these tramp steamers. Now this is what it looked like when they were allowed to come up on top of the ship once a day for fresh air. For the rest of the time, they were all in the bottom of the ship. Now, if anybody's seen the movie Golden Door, anybody? That'll give you some idea as to what it looked like. And those, I think, are almost pristine conditions that you see in Golden Door. It was even worse than that. But they were allowed to come up on top once a day for air. Now, the men, as I did in the exhibit I had at the New York Historical Society in the bunk beds, the men slept on one side of the ship, and the women slept on the other. And, the women and children on the other side. And they weren't supposed to get together for the whole trip, but who knows what happened. In any case, there were a lot of things that happened on those trips. Not all good, not all good. But when you consider the conditions I described that they were leaving, and the conditions they were coming to, it was like they had died and gone to heaven. This was nirvana, or Oz, to them. Can you imagine coming into New York Harbor and seeing skyscrapers? I mean, and gleaming lights off of these buildings that these rural country peasants had seen for the first time in their lives. I mean, it was spectacular. And of course, the Madonna was meeting him in the harbor. So this is what they died and gone to heaven. Of course, they had to be processed before they got to heaven, and they were processed at Ellis Island. This is the Great Hall of Ellis Island. Matter of fact, I was given that picture that you can look at after, which was in Life magazine in 1983 of the Mazuka family, and that's all the relatives from that family. That from the one woman who's sitting in the front, who came here, and that all her offspring's with her. To give you an idea. So this was a very, and you know the stories about, and no need to tell you the stories, but you know the stories, you've all seen movies about it, where people would turn back. Well, that wasn't so much. Not as much as people would like us to believe. Primarily because it cost the captains of the ships money if they had to bring you back. So they had doctors, as they did, if you remember in Golden Door, those of you who saw it, there were doctors examining the people before they got on the ship. That was a must. Because if you weren't healthy, they didn't want you on the ship in the first place. Because if you got to Ellis Island and you had to be sent back, the captain had to pay for you to go back. So they really were very careful, tried to be as careful as they could to get as many healthy people as possible. But of course, some did have to return. But then some, again, as I said, went back and forth. And this is another picture. This is a later picture in the 1950s. People greeting people after World War II, greeting people on the docks. Now, these are some examples of some of the passports that they had at the time. Certificates of citizenship, passports. This one is in the third showcase actually back there. This one is from before the kingdom when it was a kingdom. This is from 1860. This one up here. Before the unification. Now, I have to tell you a little bit about the story that goes behind this one. When they arrived here, of course, they had been told, nobody believed it though, that the streets were paved with gold. Mario Cuomo used to like to say, they were told the streets were paved with gold, but instead they had to pave the streets. Well, in truth, they did pave the streets. There was a lot, and as farm laborers, that's basically what they knew, to work with their hands, and they did a lot of that. But the conditions were so much better here than they were in Italy. I mean, here, if you worked, you got paid. Now that may sound like a unique thing, but in Italy it wasn't. Matter of fact, today you could work today. In 2013 you could work in southern Italy and not get paid all week long. It still could happen because there just isn't any money. So that happened. That still happened. That still does happen today, so in some places. But if you worked here, you got paid, and then you could eat well. I mean, I remember 20 years ago interviewing some of the immigrants who came during the immigration period, and one in particular saying to me that, I asked him, why didn't you ever go back? He says, go back. He says, this is my country. I says, there was nothing there for me. The newer immigrants that come from Italy today don't understand this because things have changed somewhat. But there was nothing there for them. They wanted to become American. They wanted to be American. And Italy was such a young country, there was no history of it as a country either. So when people were identified with being Napolitan or Calabrese or Sicilian, that made more sense to them because that was their region. They didn't really identify with Italy as a country yet. All right. But they came here in the conditions that they had, in the houses, they had these tenement buildings, of course. This isn't the tenement building, but you'd have railroad apartments with a window in the front and a window all the way in the back, and no windows on the side because you're between two buildings. And but when they were in Italy, they had dirt floors, and they had to go down to the stream to get the water. They had cold running water in the apartments, cold, not hot, but at least they had cold running water. So that was a big improvement for them. And as I said, they got paid, they ate, and they could eat well, and they could raise a family. Most of the Italian immigrants that came were more concerned in that period with survival. They were concerned, as Maslow, and those of you, I know there are a lot of educators in this room, Maslow's hierarchical scale, food, clothing, and shelter. That's what they were concerned about. Second generation got educated, more educated, and took much more. Some of the first did, but more the second. Much more the second. And the third generation, forget it. I mean, they've got plenty of education. They're upper middle class, upper middle class, economically amongst everybody, the highest in America today. So they've succeeded in being successful with education and in economics over 3 generations. The first generation did not do this. It was the second and third generation that this happened with. Now you'd arrive here on Mulberry Street, and who would you want, or because this was the biggest street, and if you came from Naples, you'd be living on Mulberry Street because this is where the Neapolitan people came. Why did they come here? They came by chain migration. One person chain. One link in a chain would tell another link in a chain. So you'd write to your countrymen. You couldn't write yourself, so you'd come to have somebody to write it for you. So where did you go? You went to a bank. There were a lot of these little banks, like this one that's here now. This is Banca Stabile. But you'd go to the banker, and he had a little more education than you did. Not much, but enough to be able to write a letter. He'd write a letter back to in this case to Naples, saying tell your countrymen or your paisan that there were jobs here, that I can get you work, and you can live with me in my apartment. So he'd write the letter, and I'll lend you the money to come, or the bank would lend them the money to come. The bank did a lot of that because they were patrons. They would go to Italy and they would post that there were jobs in America, and the people would take the jobs and they would have to pay them back the transportation at a reasonable rate. Sometimes not reasonable, but in this case with this bank it was reasonable. And they would get to America. So there was all these little shops and all these little stores. And people defined, and as I talked about Italy in 1861, it really wasn't a unified country yet. All right, there was no common language. Italian, as you know it today, was not Italian. I mean, they spoke dialects or sometimes languages. I mean, in certain parts of Calabria, they actually still speak Abresh, which is like the Albanians. In Sicily, the Sicilian language, it's a language. It's really not even, most people don't consider it to be a dialect. Neapolitans consider it to be a dialect. I'm not supposed to say Calabrese anymore. It's Calabrian. I've been told, and so it's all these different languages. So you would go to somebody who could speak your language. In this case, this was Bancastabile. He spoke Neapolitan. And Neapolitan was the language on the street. If you were on Elizabeth Street, the language was Sicilian, right? Because the Sicilians all congregated there. So each street had its own, language or people from that particular area. And that's what happened. This is Bancastabile. This picture. This is the first Bancastabile, not the one you're sitting in. This was at 74 Mulberry Street, which is on the other side of the canal. All right, later on, when Francesco, and that's his son Jerome, when Francesco got successful, he went on to have another office at 131 Mulberry Street, which is where the novelty store is down here, next to SPQR that just closed. All right, and then in 1882 he started building this corner, and he built all 5 of these buildings, and he put his bank here, and he operated here as a bank until 1932. He died in 1920, but the bank operated until 1932. The Depression closed them down. They actually were licensed by the state of New York as a bank. Many of these places around here were not licensed, but they were. But they had to close in 1932 because they didn't have enough money on deposit. They moved the money to Banco di Commerciale, which is still in existence, Banco di Commerciale d'Italia, and nobody lost any money. But if you walked up and down on Mulberry Street, this is 243 Mulberry Street, you would see stores like this. All right, and this was, of course, they sold lasagna. All right, it's bread, and of course cans of tomatoes in the window as well. All right, and I think that's kind of sweet, actually. Of course, this is a famous landmark, which you don't know of anymore. This is 187 Grand Street, where the poster shop is next door. Well, okay. 187 Grand Street was Ernest Rossi's first establishment. He came here in 1910. He established his libreria, which was selling sheet music. Sheet music was a huge part of the sales that took place in Rossi's. Why? Because that's how the immigrants would entertain themselves. They either played mandolins or guitars, a little concertina, and they would sit around. There was no radio. There was no television. Forget about it. Radio they didn't have. There was no motion pictures for them to go and see. So they would entertain themselves. They'd play some music on musical instruments. We have a mandolin on exhibition. But I don't know how many of you got to see Guitar Heroes at the Metropolitan Museum of Art last summer? You missed it, huh? Well, it's too bad, because this made me so proud, because it was the first time that I can recall a major cultural institution having an exhibition besides the one that I did at the Historical Society in their premises. Guitar Heroes, Monteleone, D'Agusto, and Agostino all lived in Little Italy. These are some of the most famous guitar makers in America, and they had an exhibition of their work, and it was just absolutely magnificent. Well, of course, we know Italians are very musical. They love music. I mean, obviously, Rossi had a lot of instruments, but you also had a lot of people who made instruments down here as well. You also had pianola stores as well. We have in the Rossi showcase in the back. There was a pianola factory down here as well too, where they made the upright pianos, where they had the rolls. Pianola, for those of you who are younger than me, who don't know what they are, you would put these rolls inside an upright piano, and they had little holes in them, and you'd pump it with your feet, and it would make a tinny sound that would come through it. So if you couldn't play the piano, at least you could pump your feet, and you would hear something come out of it. And he had a big business in that as well. But Rossi's is a landmark. I mean, most of you probably remember, some of you anyway, remember Rossi when across the street when he was Novellas. they were there for years also. But their first store was next door to us. And now, of course, they're between Novella and Ferrara on Grand Street. And they don't sell sheet music anymore because nobody buys it. Not from them anyway. They go to Sam Ash for that. But they sell all the little trinkets and things that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, I remember coming down here as a kid, and buying my mother's pizzelle maker. Everybody know pizzelles? Pizzelle maker with like waffles, only very thin. Buying a pizzelle maker from Rossi because you could only get certain things down here in this section. Unfortunately, more and more of those stores, there were several of those stores in those days. They were all gone, except
What does that
Rossi's.
word mean, calendari? What's that?
Yes. Okay, and now another staple of the community, and it has its pluses and minuses, were the organ grinders. Can you see this picture? Now, we actually have an organ in the back too, which dates back to 1889. And and people would be entertained with the organ grinders as well. We're talking about the life of Little Italy, all right? So what they would do is they would have an organ that they would put on a stick, because it didn't come that way. They would mount it on a stick, and then they would have a little monkey that would dance around with a little cup, and they would ask for something that get some donations. It was another way of getting a little entertainment. Also, up and down Mulberry Street, there were a lot of bars in this area of Little Italy. There were a lot of bars and cafes, and that was a part of the social life as well. I mean, you realize with the dingy, dark apartments that they had, getting out into the streets was an important part of just getting some air, and then going into these public places. And the public places weren't so much your apartment, but with these cafes. So that was another way. Another way that they were entertained, I don't think I have a picture of this on here. I don't know if I do or not. Well, that's the Garibaldi Bakery, Cafe Garibaldi. Another way they were entertained, but you'll see that in here is the puppets. There were 3 puppet theaters here on Mulberry, in this area, in Little Italy. The biggest one was the Matteo puppet family. And they had a puppet, 106 Mulberry Street, right next to the Church of Most Precious Blood, which is down here near Canal Street, where Cha-Cha's is, by the way, right where the Cha-Cha's restaurant is. That's where the Mulberry, where they had their puppet theater. And it was a storefront, and they had a basement, and they had put this beautiful, they made their own stage, and they made the puppets, the 2 of them that you see up there in the front are the large ones. I have 32 of those in our collection.
How'd you get them?
The Matteo family gave them to me. I became very close friends with Pino Matteo when I was dean of the Calandra Institute. And Pino said, I want those puppets to come back to Mulberry Street. So when I was able to get this property and purchase it in 2008, Pino, who unfortunately has now got Alzheimer's, is in Florida, told his son Michael, you have to give those puppets to Dr. SCELSA. So he gave me all 32 of them. And I have them in our collection. They're in storage right now. As soon as we open up the next section, we hope to have all 32 on display. So you'll be able to see them. They're very impressive. The question usually comes up, can anybody do a puppet show? The answer is no. And first of all, they're delicate. Although they're very sturdy, if they get damaged, I don't know how to fix them. I don't think there's anybody that knows how to fix them. The Jim Henson Society has told me they're the holy grail of puppetry in America, because they are the first real puppet companies in America. In the puppet shows, this I hope to get a grant from either the Smithsonian or from the National Endowment for the Arts. I have the original librettos that Agrippino Matteo wrote back in the 1920s in Italian in composition books. Yeah, in composition books. And I have some original footage which hopefully isn't too destroyed. We can get it restored. That was taken of them in the early days. So there's a lot of work to be done, and it takes an awful lot of time to do it. But if we're going to remember this experience, and it's not just nostalgia. I mean, to me it's nostalgia, but it's not just nostalgia. It really is an important part of the American story. It's an important part of the Lower East Side. It's an important part of what happened here, because before the Italians, the Irish were here in this area. Before the Irish, the Germans were in this area. You have the Ben Rensselaer House, which is 149 Mulberry Street, which is right next door to where the Palazzo is. All right, that was the Ben Rensselaer House. So, you know, this is wave after wave after wave. As people became more successful, they moved away. You know, of course now, the young people moving back in here are paying ridiculous rents for what their grandparents, you know, were cutting away from. You know, but that's the way it is. The Garibaldi Bakery was 185 Grand Street, which is the store where, with the back of the other side of Il Palazzo, and that was here. And the Cantanelli family had that establishment, and they were there for years and years and years as well. Of course, a staple, and people don't think of it, but a way into the civil service was the street cleaning. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous street cleaners that we have in our community was originally Giuseppe Petrosino. Now, some of you know him as the lieutenant detective that was killed in the line of duty in Palermo when he was investigating the relationship between the Black Hand and the Mafia, and if there was, they were able to deport the criminals. He was killed in Palermo. What you may not know is he was first appointed to the police department by Theodore Roosevelt when he was police commissioner of New York. And he didn't appoint him first as a policeman. He appointed him first as a sanitation man. So this was the stepping stone. I mean, this was the more menial job that the Italians could get. They couldn't get the job as the police officer yet. So there was a stepping, and there was tremendous amount of discrimination. Tremendous. I had the good fortune, and I have the tape of it also, of the first Columbia Association of New York, Italian American Colombian Associations of New York was the NYPD. And I interviewed 3 of the founders of that organization. They're all dead now. I interviewed them. I have them on video. I have them on videotape. Unfortunately, I need to get them transferred. And in fact, hopefully they're still right. That was 25 years ago. I did this. 25 years ago. So I have the tapes. And when I was interviewing them, at that time, as I told you, I was dean of the Calandra Institute at City University. I was at the City University studios. And they're talking up a storm, and they're happy to be there. And these are old guys, and they were in their 80s then, all right? And they tell me about what the discrimination that they got from the Irish cops, and how they were given the worst assignments, and you know how they had their lockers were turned upside down, and all kinds of things that they did to them. As soon as I got them on the air,
The blue wall.
I said, "Sal, what are you doing?" I said, "You just..." I can't talk about that on the air. But I got them to say a few things about the founding a little bit, but not the real stuff, because it was really rough for them. So, and today, I don't know if people realize it or not, but the largest ethnic group on the NYPD is not Irish. It's Italian. The largest ethnic group in the NYPD today. Now, the Feast of San Gennaro is the oldest running feast in New York, all right? Street festival feast in New York. It's 86 years old this year. It was 86 years old this year. It was started by the Neapolitans living on Mulberry Street. Made sense because this was the Neapolitan street. They wanted their patron saint, which is the patron saint is Gennaro. Saint Gennaro is the patron saint of Naples. He was killed by Diocletius, the emperor of Rome in 305 AD. Now, the Romans didn't like the Catholics too much. I mean, they threw him to the lions, right? Well, in this case, instead of throwing him to the lions, they cut off his head. Gennaro was the bishop of Naples. They cut off his head, and they saved his blood in 2 cruets, 2 vessels. Those two vessels with his blood reside in the Church of Most Precious Blood in Naples. Okay? And every year on September 19th, they have a procession with the blood in the streets of Naples, and the blood turns from solid to liquid. If it doesn't turn to liquid, bad year. Could be a lot of trouble. It's been said that Vesuvius will erupt, and all kind of terrible things will happen. But that's why we have the Feast of Saint Gennaro here on Mulberry Street, because this was the Neapolitan street. And this is why you have the Church of Most Precious Blood. Not the most precious blood of Jesus Christ, the most precious blood of Saint Gennaro. This is not Saint Gennaro, but this is typical of what the feasts were like in the 1950s. This is from the 1950s. This is the Feast of Saint Cero. St. Gerald, there were a lot of different feast days around there. I mean, the Feast of St. Gerald was on Elizabeth Street because this is a Sicilian feast, right? And here they are putting the dollar bills, or in those days they probably were just dollar bills, on the feast. And look at the crowds of people, huge crowds of people gathering around. And that's what it was like. But it wasn't the type of thing that you have today. Today, especially thanks to Bloomberg, and I mean that with tongue in cheek, it's no longer an Italian feast. I mean, you've got everything from eyeglass vendors to pina colada sellers, and I don't particularly like that. So that's not traditional to me. I mean, it's nice to everybody have a party, but this is supposed to be an Italian feast. So in any case, they would make their own games, and they would have games like throwing a beanbag into slots, and they would make their own. And in those days, they made their own sausage, not like what you get today. The sausage that you get is not made by them; it's brought from someplace else and brought in here. You don't have any of those stores anymore. If you want to find those types of places now, unfortunately, you're not going to find them here. The only place I can send you to is Arthur Avenue, up in the Bronx, where you'll get a feeling for what the Italian stores were like. You have the Calandra cheese store, you have Randazzo's, the fish store, you have Biancardi's, the meat store, you have Adio Brothers and Madonia Brothers up there, the bread stores. You have none of those down here anymore. They're all gone. They're all gone. The only one you have Parisi, which is an outlet for Parisi on Mott Street. It's not actually where they make the bread, but they sell some of the bread there. They're the last ones, I believe, the last bread store down here. And you don't have any fish stores or any meat stores. You have DePaulo's across the street at Sala Maria, which is excellent. But you don't have a lot of those other stores that used to exist. They're all gone. All gone. And I venture to say that there'll probably be more of them gone as the years go by. I appreciate your efforts with preservation, but I don't think you're going to bring those stores back. I think maybe the buildings, but not the stores. Those people are gone, and the children don't mostly want to do that type of work anymore. The interesting part, though, is that there was something in being in a family business like that was very, very close. Madonia, for example, he's got a bachelor's in business administration, Madonia Brothers Bakery up in the Bronx, and he had gone off to do work as an accountant or something, and went back to the store. And Randazzo did the same thing also. So they're educated. They're men with master's degrees that have gone back to that, because there's something about working with your family and working in a community that just feeds you in a different way besides money, and it's a beautiful thing. One of my family members has a restaurant, 6 generations on Arthur Avenue, the Mario's restaurant, Vero Mario's, 6 generations on Arthur Avenue, and still completely family run. Still completely family run. There's something that really feels good about just being in that type of a situation. Of course, we get. This is a little bit of my proselytizing, I guess. But we get hung up in the idea of upward mobility, but sometimes we lose track of what's really, or what can be really important. It's nice to have nice things, nice to make a lot of money, but when you lose that closeness, you've lost more than you can ever regain. Anyway, enough of that. But you had that here. Here's some more of the street cleaners. This was during the San Gennaro Festival too. You would come and you would see this too. They invented this here. This doesn't happen in Italy. You would see a Giglio not here on Mulberry Street in Brooklyn, but Giglio is the high that they would create. But this is the grease pole, and you had to climb to the top of the pole to get the prize, and they had the whole thing greased. This was in the 1970s, though. This was the early 1970s. That's the original burners. Of course, this is what Banca Stabile looked like when it was built in 1885. That's a historic photograph. And you had a store selling safes over here next to it. And that's what it looked like back in the day. You can still see the gas lamps. And that's what it looks like today. Not quite the same. Yeah, red and green. Okay. Here we go. This is the inside of the bank, of course. You can't see all of this as you're walking. Sometimes we're small, so you don't see, really can't get a real grasp of it sometimes. But that's the original marble, original trouser floors, the original cages, the bank cages here. Each one had a different service. The one all the way down at the end, the one closest to me, it was for selling steamship tickets. There was a large business in that. This one is paying and receiving. Here it is. Here's another one of the cages. And then, well, like I said, this was considered the Wall Street of Little Italy, Mulberry Street. There was so many banks. There was like one on each block. This is some interesting Italian money that, of course, they would change dollars to lira, liras to dollar. But this one is these are from 1943. As you can see, it says, issued in Italy, in English. Because this is occupied money, when we occupied Italy in 1943. I get a kick out of that, because I call this American-Italian money, instead of Italian-American money.
Not the Napoli money.
No. And here's the steamship ticket sign. The luggage tags. And I have one or two of the valises and steamship trunks. And in the third showcase, you'll also see a copy of the tickets. $30 to cross the Atlantic Ocean. Carolina Coppola, Francis Ford. And of course, all up and down Mulberry Street, this you would see in push carts. Some of them went on to become very, very successful entrepreneurs. But this is where you would get your produce. And not only your produce, whether it was chestnuts, or it was fish, or it was dry goods. And this was the actual size of the cart. The one I have up here, where I have the little gifts in the front, that is an actual push cart. It was falling apart. I got it in Brooklyn, but we had it restored to what the original shape and size, and that's exactly what it looked like. They were on a slant, and you'll notice that's on a slant so that people could look into it, and there would be one next to another, next to another, next to another, next to another. And some of the pictures I have outside too show some of the old carts in the street. The only one left on Mulberry Street's inside here. There's not one left anymore. This is the only one.
Did they rent the spots? How did they know their spot was secure?
I wouldn't exactly call it rent.
You better not come to this.
But I mean,
But they secured their spot.
they secured it, but it wasn't by the city that they secured it from.
No, it was not the city.
No, you better not take my spot.
No, it was. They had their own system of doling out spots.
They did. At the end of the day, did they move the carts away, or they
Yeah, at
just
the end of the day, they left. No, the carts were left there without the produce on it.
without?
Without the produce on it. Yeah, they would leave them. They would leave them there at night. But this was considered, in some ways, the safest and also the neighborhood in New York, because nobody touched anything. If you did,
No hands.
exactly, something would happen. This is the inside. This of the bank, okay. And this is the bank vault in the back. Where Stabile kept his money, and the front cages. Another one of the puppets, the Pupanino that's on the side over here. The organ grinder that you can look at in the back afterwards with the monkey on top. Organ, there he is with the monkey again. Oh yes, Anna Pecora's wedding gown. There are, weddings of course have always been important. Celebrations, and this was probably the best dress you're ever going to buy in your life. This one happens to be a white dress that we have on, but the one in the window also is a wedding gown too. We have several wedding gowns, wedding dresses that are in colors, because you would buy something that was just you would be able to use again. There was just something you just wouldn't buy it for one day. That was unusual to have a white wedding gown. You had to have you were a little more affluent if you could do this. And this is a shirtwaist. And some of you've heard of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory flyer. We have the dedication to it in that window. This is what a shirtwaist looked like. The women wore a skirt underneath, and this is the way they would dress. And they would have the shirtwaist on top. This is called a shirtwaist, and this is what they were making when unfortunately those poor women were killed. And that's the machine that they the singer-sewing machine that they would be working on. And this is the iron, the coal iron that you put the coal inside. It was a harsh life, but it was a wonderful life, you know. And as time progressed, it faded, and now we have the museum to keep it alive. That's really basically the story of the immigrants and what they've accomplished and what they struggled with. So if you have any questions. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
It's not a question.
Statement? Sure.
Many years ago, when I was in a totally different business, we used to come down to the lower east side to find carvers and sculptors. They were always Italian, to carve cabinetry and so on. They also had very wonderful skills in addition to a lot of the different labor.
Absolutely, and as I point out, Luigi Del Bianco's work here, he was a major stone carver from Mount Rushmore. The Piccirilli brothers, who didn't live in Little Italy, but they had their studio in the Bronx, in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx, were incredible carvers. They did the pediment in front of the New York Stock Exchange. They did all of the lions and all the sculptures around the New York Public Library. They also did the Lincoln Memorial for Damon French. They fabricated and shipped it down to Washington, D.C. Constantino Bramiti is the architect of the U.S. Capitol, the first one who did the apotheosis of Washington in the Rotunda, all the frescoes. Italians are beautiful at this country. I mean, and they loved America. America was this wonderful experience, this noble experiment, you know, of democracy that they all believed in and wanted to be part of. So yes, there were Italians that came earlier than the immigrant population from the 1880s, but they really weren't Italian. They were from these different areas that I described before 1861. The two signers of the Declaration of Independence, William Parker, David Rodney. William Parker became governor of Maryland. David Rodney became governor of Delaware. And we also have Filippo Mazzei, who is in Monticello, Jefferson's home. He was a botanist, and he wrote a book called Furioso, and it's in the library in Monticello. And it was written in Italian of the day. And Jefferson read Italian. And in that book, he gives Jefferson the words, "All men are created equal." Oh, gee. So, you know, Italian thought has been very much alive in America since its very beginnings. The Italians came here later, the immigrants from the hard work from the South, you know, to, you know, find a better life and to give. And I think I personally think they gave a lot. They gave an awful lot to this country. We built it. And I think also, I remember in 1975, when the city was on terrible shape. You know, we were going bankrupt, and you know, Big Mac bonds. Some of you remember those things. Really, there were a lot of the Italians who did not take flight. They stayed, and in the boroughs, not down here, but in the boroughs, and they stayed. And whereas a lot of people left. So, and that was, I think, so they have a tendency of wanting to maintain their areas. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Do you have any understanding that you could share about the tendency for Italians to become dock workers, longshoremen? Was there?
Well,
I have several in my family as well.
actually, when I did the exhibition at the New York Historical Society, Judge Michael Pesci gave me his father's hook, and I have another one up here, you know, bailing hook. It was another job that they could get, you know, that was again manual labor. That not that they had great expertise in it or knew anything about it before they did the shape-ups, but that's basically the reason for it. It wasn't that they were dock workers in Italy,
Right.
and they came here and those were jobs that were available.
They were strong guys.
They're strong guys and willing to work hard. There are documents that I've seen where the Italians were given less money than any other group, including African Americans. Weren't called African Americans; they were called Negroes on the documents. But we're given day wages less than anybody else because, you know, they were the lowest ones on the totem pole, but they were willing to work and work hard. and people didn't like that because they were taking jobs away from them. They're willing to work crazy hours and in all kinds of weather and all kinds of conditions. And immigrants do that all the time. I mean, I remember just 10, 15 years ago, you saw a lot of Korean grocers. You don't see too many anymore. Why?
Want to be shot.
They moved up. They moved up. The kids don't want to do that. They don't want to work. They don't work 14, 15 hours a day. They want to 18 hours a day, right? I mean, that's what the Italian storekeepers were like. Somebody was looking for a picture, and I don't have it. I'm gonna have to ask one of my friends if I can get it, if he has it, of Mario Cuomo's family, because they had a little grocery store, and those grocery stores were like banks too. I mean, you would go there if you didn't have any money. They would keep it on a record, on a tab, and you would take things on and then pay them at the end of the week. But those are crazy hours they work. They work 7 days a week, and many, many hours.
Yep.
It wasn't like it is today.
Go to the store, buy something, put it on your tab.
Joe, thank you for this presentation. You covered a lot of areas. I have a couple of questions, and they're all over the place. A couple of in order. Do you know much about the Italian Catholic Church right off of Houston? Was that part of this community?
Which one? Which church?
It's right south of Houston. St. Anthony, is it? It's a huge church.
Yeah, it's after Padua.
That's all on the west side.
Yeah, but first of all, the Italian community spread from the East River to the Hudson River, from 11th Street down to City Hall. That's how huge it was. So there was another Italian section, large Italian section in the village, where St. Anthony of Padua is, which is a beautiful church. So that's what I know about it. Is that what you want to know?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So you mentioned this was the largest Italian ethnic community. Any idea how large the population was at High Point?
It's hard to say because I don't have the numbers for the entire area. I know that I know the numbers for the city, in terms of the entire city, but it was well over 2,000 people, 2 million people in New York City, the 5 boroughs all together. 90%, well over 2 million. We still today, the 17% of New York State, about 8% of the city is of Italian descent, about 8%, even today,
Okay.
which is a large number.
Going back to the difference on Mulberry and Maud and Elizabeth or whatever, how different were these communities? The people from Calabria, did they have different types of shops? The Sicilians, the Neapolitans, was there a Sicilian butcher, a Sicilian pastry shop, a Neapolitan? How can you give us a little detail on that?
Well, absolutely there was. You had all these specialty stores, and you would go to your paisans. So even if there was a butcher on Mulberry Street and you were Sicilian, you were going to go to the one on Elizabeth Street. I mean, that's just the way it was. There still is a butcher on Elizabeth Street, the old butcher just south of Houston Street. He's still there. It's like one of the, it's hard to even, because they're between all the shops, the new shops that have come in. But he's still there. Yes, there were these different stores. There were these different specialized in different types of product that was indicative of a particular region. Absolutely. That was, and it was like going into a different area when you walk from one place to another. I mean, the story that sometimes I tell, but I didn't understand this when I was a kid. My father and mother used to have these, as parents will talk to each other and have arguments about things, and they would get into which region was better than the other. Because my father was Sicilian, and my mother was Calabrese, in little Napolitan, but they're mostly Calabrese. So who's better, which one's better, but and to me it made no sense because because I figure we're all, first of all I thought we were all American.
Right. That's
Secondly, we're Italian American. But no, they didn't see it that way. There were distinctions. And when a girl from Elizabeth Street married a guy from Mott Street or from Mulberry Street, that was a big deal. It was a big deal. It was a mixed marriage.
They went to Long Island. They moved out of town.
They moved to Levittown.
Yeah, they moved to.
Yes.
You know, my family came here, they went to Christie Street and Forsyth and Eldridge, but the population wasn't only Italian.
No, it was mixed. It was Jews. It was a lot of
Yeah,
Jewish.
a lot,
too.
because my grandmother said she used to drink coffee in a glass.
Yeah. My
And
grand.
she learned it from, she said, the Jewish women, but that's how they all drank.
This area that we're in right now, that we're sitting in, this was really solidly Italian. This was solid. But when you got to the fringes, my grandfather, after my grandparents got married, they moved to Ludlow, right next to Katz's, Delaware. And so my grandfather spoke Yiddish. You know, he wasn't Jewish, but he spoke Yiddish. Why? The same reason why he had a bissel of tea, right? You know, the same is because you know these were your neighbors, and it wasn't the same type of conflict that you have today amongst ethnic groups. And unfortunately, I have to say, you know, it was more of a camaraderie and helping each other. You know, and you were all in the same boat at those days. It was a lot different.
They speak the same language.
I have to say, with all due respect, my grandfather grew up in New York, and he said that from a Jewish background, his parents came here from Russia, and that the Italians and the Jews got along very, very well. The Jews and the Irish, a little questionable sometimes. So I think there were more alliances between some groups and
But
then other
also, the
groups.
Jews and the Italians came about the same time,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
and so they were going through the experience the same.
Yeah.
The Irish got here earlier, you know, and they had established themselves, so they felt they were one rung up on the ladder. A story I'll tell you, I didn't tell you before. Old St. Patrick's Cathedral. Have you been to it?
Yes.
Okay. Old St. Patrick's Cathedral was the first cathedral in New York, before the one on Fifth Avenue. You knew this, right?
Yes.
Okay. The reason why the Church of Most Precious Blood was built was because the Irish clergy would not allow the Italian Catholics to receive matrimony on the main altar. That's a fact. So in 1888, the Scalabrini Fathers built Most Precious Blood. Now, of course, once you have parity, everything changes. So now, by 1908, my grandparents were married in Old St. Patrick's at the main altar. But that was the reason. Yeah, there was a lot. It was a different type of, you know, if you've seen Gangs of New York, and it gives you a little feeling for it too. There was a different type of hostility from those who were here before. They were like, you know, wanted to maintain their position, and you know, the Italians and the Jews were taking over some of their spots, and I think that had a lot to do with it. Plus, the language, we spoke different languages. They spoke some English, whatever you want to call it. There wasn't really English, but they spoke some. So there was a lot more differences. Yes, sir.
Talking about Italians getting along with different ethnic groups, my family lived in East Harlem for a while. I remember my mother telling me how up to the Second World War, the young Italians from East Harlem would go into Central Harlem where all was all black, but all the swing clubs and the dance clubs were there. And there used to be a lot of mixing at that time. And there was some racial riots, I think, in the Second World War, and then that stopped. But for quite a while, there was a lot of mixing of that group and those groups. And also, if you look at some old jazz records, you'll see Italian slang and Jewish slang and even black slang all sort of mixed together. So up to for the first few decades, from the immigration to the Second World War, there was a lot of mixing of these groups, at least according to what my family said, and they moved a little of them. Some of them were down in the village, south of Washington Square Park. None over here on Mulberry Street. A lot of it in East Harlem and a lot on Arthur Avenue. But there was a lot of things, and later on, when racial conflicts got worse and people moved to the suburbs and the groups started splitting up, you see, all this racial animosity that for a while really didn't exist because everybody was in the same boat. Everybody was just poor, everybody was struggling, and they got along for quite a while until things started pushing groups apart.
Well, I think thank you for that, but I think it's an American experience, and I have my own feelings about it. I think it has to do with colonialism. I think it has to do with the English experience in America, because you don't find the same type of ethnic and racial conflicts in South America that you find in the United States, in English-speaking countries. So I think it has, think about that, it has a lot to do with it. But yeah, it's true. Matter of fact, if Louis Armstrong, who was probably the most famous jazz musician that ever was, I guess, Louis Armstrong would credit Nick LaRocca with having the first Dixieland jazz band. Yeah, there's a large immigration. This is not about New York. It's about New Orleans of Italians to the South after the Civil War. After the Emancipation Proclamation, Southern planters thought that the Sicilians would be a suitable people to farm the lands. So the Sicilians were brought in. The Sicilians didn't last too long at that. They started doing their own businesses, and before you know it, became very successful. But yeah, so there was a lot of intermingling. And who did the Italians mingle with mostly? The Africans, freed Africans. So they were only taught not to be with them. They weren't by a society that was racially prejudiced to begin with. And that's unfortunate, because I will say this, and I'm not ashamed of it, and some people will take umbrage with it. Italians are not Aryans. We're not white as white could be. We're not unless you came from the Piedmonte region, and then you're Germanic. You came from southern Italy, from the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and everybody mixed in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. In 1492, the Moors came through the south. All right, and a lot of Italians have Jewish blood that don't even know it. All right, a lot, especially in Calabria, by the way, and also in Sicily. The Moors came through. The Moors weren't too light-skinned, So if you do a little searching around, we were really taught in America to be prejudiced. It didn't come to us naturally, and it's unfortunate because even when you look at some of the documentation of immigrants coming into New York, or the Italians coming into New York, they'll have next to their category the dark-skinned or light-skinned. All right, so that stopped after a while, but in the beginning that's the way it was. It's more of a political determination than it is actually a genetic determination. And that's America. Now you can take umbrage with me with this if you want. I don't have a problem with that. But the facts are the facts. Everybody's come from Southern Italy. It was the melting pot of the Mediterranean. Yes, sir.
I'm assuming that in the height of the immigration, 1880 to 1920, very few of the Italian immigrants actually spoke Italian, that they only spoke their dialect.
That's correct.
Is that true? Could you
Yep.
find any Italian spoken here at all in Little Italy?
In Little Italy, I'm sure there was somebody who was educated, that could speak Italian, could be Dante Italian, but for the most part, they survived on their dialect.
And that also meant that if you were in the Neapolitan street versus the Sicilian street, you really couldn't communicate with each other, or?
Some of them really couldn't understand each other, particularly the Sicilians. Sicilian is really a separate language. It's not really like a dialect. It's like a language.
So when did they start speaking Italian instead of their dialect?
Two things happened.
After World War II?
Well, before World War II, you had, I will say Mussolini did a lot to do that, and also radio and television. That made for the common language. Prior to that, when you just start hearing the common language, it became, with education, more education, people started having the common language. But Mussolini started. Yes, sir.
To the extent that you're able, what kind of a Italian presence do you want to see the area have for the future?
Well, that's a loaded question. What kind of an Italian? This is always going to be Little Italy. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of other stores around here. I'd like to see the area maintained. I don't ever expect to see those pork stores again anymore, although I'd love to. But I would like to see the area maintained in its artistic and in its architectural splendor that it once was. What I see happening is what happened with what I call northern Little Italy, what they call Nolita, all right? North of, I call Northern, because Northern Little Italy is becoming all of Little Italy. It's coming down. It's not staying across Kenmare. It's coming down. If you look around, you see the mushrooms coming up. The mushrooms of the buildings here and there. This is going to become more and more gentrified. That's going to happen. Property values are just too high, and whoever owns the property is going to want to get the money for them. They're going to sell it. That's what's going to happen. So I see gentrification, but with preservationists like yourselves, hopefully that will be done with some sense to it, and not just complete chaos. Yes.